"You need a home, and I need a father," said the young man to the cowboy on the park bench. The words hung in the frigid Christmas Eve air of Boston Common. Mason Porter had been walking back from the Boston Public Library's digital media exhibition when he spotted him, a solitary figure hunched against the bitter cold. Snowflakes settling on his weathered Stetson hat. Blake Reynolds looked up, startled by the voice cutting through his solitude. His pale blue eyes narrowed with practiced caution beneath the brim of his hat. The large, calloused hands clutched a small leather satchel, knuckles white with cold. Fairy lights strung across the park cast his lined face in alternating shadows of red and green. "I have an apartment in South End," Mason continued, his breath clouding before him. "It's warm. I've got a couch. My family in Wellesley kicked me out 3 years ago for being gay. I've been on my own ever since." His clear green eyes held Blake's gaze, refusing to waver despite the audacity of his own proposal. Blake shifted on the bench, wincing slightly. "Son, what exactly are you talking about?" His voice came out as a low rumble, the Western Montana accent still thick despite years away from home, the kind of voice that belonged around campfires and cattle, not on a frozen Boston park bench. "It's not charity," Mason explained, pulling his designer scarf tighter. "It's an exchange. You get somewhere to stay on Christmas, and I get to not feel so alone. No one should be out here freezing tonight." A distant Christmas carol drifted from Faneuil Hall, the cheerful notes at odds with the gravity between them. When Blake tried to stand, a wave of dizziness washed over him. His knees buckled, one hand shooting out to grip the icy bench. Mason instinctively stepped forward, catching his arm. The contact surprised them both, the young graphic designer supporting the tall, weakened cowboy. "Let's go," Mason said softly. "My place isn't far." They moved slowly through the snow-covered streets, past a Starbucks packed with last-minute shoppers, the windows of L'École being decorated with woodland Christmas scenes. Mason bought 2 apple ciders from a street vendor, pressing the warm cup into Blake's trembling hands. The older man's pride fought against his need, but the cold had seeped too deeply into his bones to refuse. As they reached the red brick building in South End, Mason hesitated at the door. "I don't know your name." "Blake," the cowboy said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Blake Reynolds." "I'm Mason Porter," the young man replied, unlocking the door. "Welcome home," he added, though neither was sure who he was saying it to. Have you ever reached out to someone who seemed unreachable, only to discover they needed that connection as much as you did? If Mason and Blake's story resonates with you, subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales about chosen families and connections that defy explanation. Mason's apartment welcomed Blake with gentle warmth and the scent of cinnamon candles. The modest South End space featured mismatched IKEA furniture and walls adorned with urban art prints. Blake awoke on the couch beneath a thick quilt, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar comfort. His coat and hat hung neatly on a nearby chair. Mason stood in the small kitchenette, pouring steaming coffee into mugs. "You passed out pretty much the second you sat down last night," Mason explained, his tone matter-of-fact rather than pitying. "You needed the rest." Blake pushed himself up slowly, his large frame awkward against the modern sofa. "Thank you," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. He accepted the coffee, careful to keep his scarred hands steady. The day passed in cautious politeness, each man orbiting the other with respectful distance. At dinner, Blake insisted on cooking. "Just let me contribute something," he said firmly. "I'm not a man who takes handouts." Soon, the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of slow-cooked Montana chili, a recipe passed down through generations of Reynolds ranchers. Mason watched, fascinated, as those weathered hands moved with surprising grace, chopping and seasoning with practiced precision. "This is incredible," Mason admitted after his first bite. The chili carried warmth beyond its spices, something that tasted like heritage. Learned to make it stretch during long winters on the ranch. Blake replied, the word ranch hanging in the air between them, the first real fragment of his past offered voluntarily. Later that evening, a Patriots game provided comfortable background noise. Mason worked on his laptop, designing a campaign for Dunkin' Donuts, while Blake read a discarded newspaper. The normalcy felt strangely natural. This concept feels too generic, Mason muttered, frowning at his screen. Blake glanced over at the design. Needs more grit, the cowboy suggested. That sunrise looks too perfect. Real mornings have more struggle in them. Mason stared at him, then back at his work. With a few adjustments incorporating Blake's unexpectedly insightful feedback, the design transformed from corporate to authentic. The following morning, Mason had discovered Blake examining a framed photo on the bookshelf. Mason marching in Boston Pride Parade. Rainbow flag draped over his shoulders. Smile radiant and defiant. My parents saw this on Instagram, Mason explained, approaching slowly. 3 hours later, my father changed the locks, said he couldn't have me flaunting that lifestyle under his roof in Wellesley. Blake nodded slowly, returning the photo carefully to its place. Parents can leave deeper scars than strangers sometimes. That evening, while Blake showered, Mason's curiosity overcame his discretion. A quick search on his laptop confirmed what the rancher's calloused hands and knowledge of harsh winters had suggested. News articles chronicled the loss of the historic Reynolds Ranch near Bozeman, a fourth-generation family legacy claimed by drought, falling cattle prices, and crushing debt inherited from Blake's father. His wife had left shortly before the final foreclosure. He had lost everything. What Mason couldn't find in those articles was how a Montana rancher had ended up on a Boston park bench on Christmas Eve. But looking at the photo of Blake standing proudly beside his weathered barn, Mason recognized something in those eyes, the same quiet dignity that had refused to beg, even when freezing on a park bench. Some journeys couldn't be tracked through search engines. Some wounds required more than a stranger's curiosity to heal. We need more coffee, Dad. The words slipped out as Mason focused on his design project, absorbed in adjusting colors for a local startup's logo. Blake froze by the window where he'd been watching snow accumulate on the fire escape. The apartment fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Mason looked up, mortified. I'm sorry, I didn't... It's fine, Blake interrupted, his voice carefully neutral, but something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The casual domesticity they'd established over the past weeks suddenly felt complicated, undefined. That evening, Mason's friend Tyler visited, eyeing Blake with poorly disguised suspicion. In the kitchen, Tyler cornered Mason while Blake showered. He's literally twice your age. Mason, Tyler whispered. You pick up a homeless cowboy, and now he's living here. What do you actually know about this guy? He's not just some homeless person, Mason defended, keeping his voice low. He owned a ranch in Montana. He lost it everything. And what exactly does he want from you? Tyler pressed. Because this whole father figure thing feels like a convenient cover for something else. The accusation stung partly because it touched a nerve Mason hadn't acknowledged. The comfort he found in Blake's presence blurred lines between the father figure he craved and something more complex. When Tyler left, tension lingered like static. Later that night, CNN reported on severe drought conditions spreading across Montana. Blake watched silently, his weathered face illuminated by the television's glow, a muscle tightening along his jaw. Mason sat beside him, closer than usual, the cushion dipping slightly between them. I don't know anything about ranch life, Mason admitted. What were the summers like? Blake's voice softened as he described county fairs and rodeos, community potlucks at the local church, and the particular golden light across the fields at dusk. His description painted a world Mason had only seen in movies. Yet Blake's Montana felt authentically lived, free of Hollywood glamour. My grandfather built that barn by hand in 1938, Blake said. Every board had a story. The day the bank took it, I couldn't watch them put up the signs, just grabbed what fit in my truck and drove east. He fell quiet, the confession seeming to surprise even himself. The space between them narrowed, the air charged with unspoken questions. Mason leaned forward slightly, and for a moment, their eyes met with new awareness. Blake pulled back abruptly. "I can't," he whispered. Standing up, Mason's heart sank. "I understand," Mason said, though his tightening throat betrayed him. "No," Blake responded, voice strained. "I'm not what you need. I'm a broken old cowboy with nothing left. You deserve better than whatever this is becoming." "Why does it have to be defined?" Mason challenged, rising to face him. "You think I want a replacement, and I want you. Your strength, your stories, your quiet way of seeing things I miss." Blake trembled slightly, years of loss visible in the set of his shoulders. "That's not how the world works. Mason, I've lost too much to believe in second chances. So you'd rather leave first before anyone has the chance to choose you?" Blake didn't answer. Instead, he gathered his few belongings, slipping on his coat and boots. At the door, he paused, one hand on the frame. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibilities neither man knew how to grasp. "Thank you," Blake finally said, the words inadequate against everything unsaid. Then he was gone. Mason didn't follow immediately, his hands curled into fists, nails biting into palms. The apartment suddenly felt too large and too empty all at once. The coffee cup Blake used that morning still sat in the sink, evidence of a presence already fading. When Mason finally rushed to the street, the snow had intensified. He spotted Blake sitting on the steps of the neighboring building, head in his hands, hat beside him on the concrete. He hadn't gone far. Mason's heart leapt, but as he hurried toward him, his foot caught on ice. He fell hard, palms scraping against rough concrete, blood staining fresh snow. Blake was beside him instantly, kneeling without hesitation. "Hold still," he murmured, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and wrapping it gently around Mason's bleeding hand. His touch was tender, at odds with his calloused fingers. Under the street lamp's glow, their breath mingled in the cold air. "I came looking for you." "Oh," Mason admitted, eyes wide with a vulnerability neither man could hide anymore. A year passed, marked by seasons changing across Boston's skyline. Mason's graphic design career flourished, his portfolio expanding to include a critically acclaimed exhibit called Identities in America at Mass Art Gallery. The collection explored diverse American experiences, including a piece featuring a weathered Stetson hat illuminated against a dark background. Critics praised its powerful examination of fading Western mythology, unaware of the personal history behind the image. Mason volunteered regularly at Bagley, mentoring LGBTQ+ youth navigating family rejection. Each story he heard reinforced the truth he'd learned firsthand. Sometimes the families we create matter more than those we're born into. His apartment remained largely unchanged, except for the Montana landscape print now hanging in the hallway. Blake found purpose at Healing Hooves, a therapeutic riding center in Concord, where his innate understanding of horses proved invaluable for children with disabilities. His knowledge of ranch life translated surprisingly well to the structured environment. Once a week, he attended a support group for veterans and displaced farmers at the VA Medical Center. Men who understood losing land and livelihood. Thanksgiving arrived with an invitation from Tyler to join his family's celebration. But Mason declined. Instead, he served meals at a community center for LGBTQ+ youth without homes for the holiday. As he ladled cranberry sauce onto plates, he couldn't help wondering if Blake was celebrating somewhere, if he had found people who appreciated his quiet strength, his chili recipe, his way of noticing what others missed. The Christmas season brought snow and memories. Mason found himself walking through Boston Common, stopping at the bench where he'd first seen Blake. He sat briefly, feeling the cold seep through his designer jeans, trying to imagine what desperation felt like in a man who had once owned acres of Montana Skyshima. On Christmas Eve, Mason attended a poetry reading at Bookshich Cafe in Jamaica Plain, a cozy art space filled with mismatched furniture and local artwork. The theme was chosen family, and Mason had submitted a piece weeks earlier, never expecting it to be selected. Now, approaching the small stage, his heart hammered against his ribs. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he faced the warm, attentive crowd. "My name is Mason Porter," he began, voice finding strength with each word. "I used to think family was something you were born with. When mine decided they didn't want me, I thought I'd lost my chance at belonging." He paused, scanning the audience. "Then one Christmas Eve, I met someone who taught me that home isn't four walls or shared DNA. It's where someone truly sees you." The cafe hushed as Mason continued, describing hands calloused from generations of ranch work that were still gentle enough to bandage wounds. He spoke of Montana's sunsets, described so vividly he could almost see them, of chili recipes passed down through weathered cookbooks, of strength that carried not just physical burdens, but emotional ones. He had cold hands but a warm heart. Mason read teas. He was a cowboy who'd lost his ranch, and I was a city kid who'd lost his way. His voice grew thick with emotion. He didn't stay long, but he taught me that home is where someone sees you, truly sees you, and decides to stay. And even if they have to leave for a while, you wait for them. Applause rippled gently through the room as Mason stepped off the small stage, emotionally drained yet somehow lighter. He made his way toward the back of the cafe, accepting quiet compliments from strangers touched by his words. Then he saw him. Standing near the exit, hat held respectfully in his hands, Blake wore a clean dark shirt instead of his usual flannel, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed. He looked different, the deep exhaustion in his eyes replaced by a quiet resolve. Blake stepped forward as Mason approached. "I heard there was a writer here I needed to see," he said, voice low. "That was quite a story." Mason stared, speechless, afraid that speaking might shatter this moment, that Blake might disappear again into the Boston winter. "I kept something," Blake continued softly, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and worn at the edges. Mason recognized it instantly. The note he'd left on the coffee table that first morning. "You're not invisible. You were the first person to see me again," Blake whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Not the homeless man, not the failure, just me." Outside, snowflakes danced beneath street lamps, Christmas lights reflected in the cafe windows. The city hummed with holiday energy. But between these two men stood a quieter celebration, the recognition that sometimes the journey away is necessary to find the way back home. Morning light spilled through the apartment window, catching dust motes that danced in golden beams. Blake leaned against the doorframe, a steaming coffee mug cradled in his hands, watching Mason sketch at the kitchen table. "You know," he murmured, "this is the first morning in years yet you've even woken up feeling like something was missing." Mason glanced up, his smile unguarded in the gentle dawn light. On the table between them sat a small framed photo taken at the Poetry Cafe the night before. Beneath it lay a card with two simple words, "Welcome home." In the days that followed, they settled into a rhythm that acknowledged both their differences and connections. Blake no longer slept on the couch but shared Mason's bed, their relationship evolving beyond the initial roles they'd assigned each other. The transition felt natural, as if their hearts had recognized something their minds were only beginning to understand. One morning, Mason led Blake into his small studio corner where a large blank canvas leaned against the wall. "I've been saving this space," Bond explained, gesturing toward it. "I want to paint you, not as the man on that park bench, but as the man who came home." Blake stood in the doorway, momentarily speechless. "I never imagined anyone would want to create a picture of me," he whispered. "You built something in me first." Mason replied, "This is just returning the foundation." They spent weekends exploring Boston through Blake's newcomer eyes, finding beauty in historic architecture that Mason had long taken for granted. Blake taught Mason about an authentic cowboy culture beyond Hollywood stereotypes, the work ethic, the connection to land, the quiet resilience of rural communities. In turn, Mason introduced Blake to his chosen family, friends from Bagley, artists from his gallery showings, neighbors who had checked on him after Blake left. Initially reserved, Blake gradually opened up, his authentic stories of Montana ranch life captivating Mason's urban friends. "You've made this place feel bigger somehow," Mason remarked one evening as they sat together, Blake polishing his boots while Mason sketched design concepts. Blake looked up, setting his work aside. "It's your home." "Mason, I'm just grateful to be part of it." "No," Mason insisted, moving closer. "It's more than that now." Their eyes met in the soft lamplight, the distance between them now measured in inches rather than the miles and months that had once separated them. Blake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover beautifully tooled with an image of a cityscape meeting open prairie. He pushed it across the table to Mason. "For your stories," he said simply. Mason opened it, finding an inscription on the first page in Blake's neat handwriting. "Family is not built by blood, but by the hands that hold you when you're lost." They planned a summer trip to Montana, not to reclaim what Blake had lost, but to help him make peace with his past. Mason wanted to see the land that had shaped Blake, to understand the vastness that sometimes still shadowed his eyes. Together, they created an Instagram account called Two-Way Home, documenting their journey between urban Boston and rural Montana culture, building a community of others finding their place between worlds. The following morning, Blake made pancakes with authentic Vermont maple syrup while Mason set the table by the window, as sunlight filtered through Boston's winter haze, warming their shared space. Mason said softly, "I think we both found what we needed." Blake nodded, not from lack of words, but because he had finally found the peace to be silent without feeling alone. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Has someone seen you when you felt invisible? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the courage to be seen exactly as we are. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of chosen families and the homes we build beyond walls.